The Spider-Man PS4 sequel is arguably the most anticipated upcoming PlayStation exclusive, with the first game setting a record for selling 3.3 million copies for its first 3 days of release, and with it being what's now considered the best Spider-Man game, the hype for a sequel is something that's never been seen before in Spider-Man games. What's expected is that the game will be releasing for the PlayStation 5, with the console releasing later during this year, meaning we're probably not getting the game as a launch title. But new plot leaks suggest when we could be getting our first look at the upcoming game this summer, with the game releasing in the later half of 2021, along with new details for what the game could hold. But before diving into what the future could hold for Insomniac's Spider-Man according to these plot leaks, I do recommend checking out another video on my channel which covers earlier plot leaks that could relate to these upcoming leaks. The link will be in the description. So to begin, just like the previous leaks, these supposed plot leaks are once again coming from Reddit, but this time from a different user. Although this could just be a throwaway count for the user from the earlier leaks, but regardless the name is different. What this post entails appears to have expanded upon some of the information in the previous post, with the first bullet point from this post being a holiday 2021 release for Spider-Man possibly in September. Now this is believable, and in fact I think I even mentioned in the previous video the latest I expect the game to release is by the end of 2021. That would have been 3 years since the release of the first game, and will be just under a year since the release of the PlayStation 5. As far as for a reveal this summer, I think it's likely to happen since the first reveal for Spider-Man PS4 was 2 years before its release, and showcasing this game along with the PlayStation 5 would be an excellent marketing move, certainly better than some of the marketing the Avengers game has put out. Next is something that shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. The game will be single player with no online gameplay. I understand the expected addition of Miles as Spider-Man may have spawned some discussion that the game could be online, especially with the Avengers game allowing the players to team up as different heroes, but traditionally Spider-Man games are offline, and I honestly have no complaint with that. I expect it. Like the previous leak, Queens and Brooklyn are supposed to be added, but this time with new gameplay mechanics that would adapt to the low building traversal. These are of course the homes of Miles and Peter, and we haven't had the addition of Brooklyn ever in a Spider-Man game, and Queens hasn't been around since Ultimate Spider-Man. Personally, I'm looking forward to this if this is true, especially with the gameplay being altered to fit the borough. I also wonder if we'll be able to free roam into these areas at any time, or it'll just be something available during the story. Basically, we'd spawn in at the city at one point. Although the user does mention the bridges as a way of getting to these areas, hopefully they're available at all times. Next, the game is set during the winter like the previous leak, 5 to 6 months after the first game, with Aunt May's death still affecting Peter and MJ being absent for the first half of the story. Winter is something I'm hoping turns out to be true. There hasn't been snow in any free roaming Spider-Man game. It's my favorite season, and the game would look amazing swinging throughout the city at night with snow falling. Although this user stated in a comment just because it's winter doesn't mean we'll get snow, that sounds dumb to me. What's the point of even bringing up the season the game takes place in if there's no snow? Now I do get that Peter would still be mourning the death of Aunt May after many months. He's lost everyone who's ever raised him, and from the look of this post, MJ won't play as big of a role as she did in the first game, which is good news for those who don't want MJ missions in the upcoming game, although the user doesn't say if there will be MJ missions for the upcoming game, although I'd bet there isn't considering we'd be playing as 2 Spider-Men throughout the story. Next is something interesting that relates to the story. Oscorp is attempting to clone certain DNA to build a super soldier, which goes wrong and spawns new villains. I believe a reference to the clones was mentioned in the previous leaks, and while this sounds interesting, I'm hoping this isn't true since this was sort of the thing the TASM series was going for. It kinda gets boring if all of the villains are coming from one place, and what this sounds like to me is a reiteration of the storyline from the Amazing Spider-Man game. In that game, the cross-species experiments went wrong, and Oscorp was responsible for all the villains of the game. Now, I do believe Oscorp could be responsible for some of the game's villains. Norman basically made Mr. Negative what he was, but I'm hoping the only villains that relate to Oscorp in the series involve the symbiotes and the Goblin. Now, the next bullet point is something that was teased at the end of the first game, and something I'm not looking forward to: Harry Osborn as Venom. We don't need Harry as Venom. Harry is the Goblin if he's any villain. There hasn't been a proper Spider-Man Venom story in media outside the comics in a long time, and I want to see an accurate adaptation of Venom with Insomniac's flavoring. You can do that with Eddie Brock being Venom, which would still give a relationship between the two just like Peter and Harry. But although I might not agree with Harry as Venom, it could be good. Another user commented on this post and asked if there would be a symbiote Spider-Man, which OP responded with something along along the lines of, "It was made for Harry and he's unsure if it will attach to anyone else." Now, I think that's some shit. You can't do Venom without Spider-Man if there's going to be a Spider-Man in the universe. Everyone wants to play as Black Suit Spider-Man, and I believe Brian Intihar said something along the lines of, "The Black Suit story is one of the best in comics and it needs to be told right." And I mean, if there's not going to be a symbiote Spider-Man, then what was the point of leaving the Black Suit out of the first game if you're not going to use it? And from the sound of it, Insomniac is taking the ultimate route with the symbiote being a cure for a disease. Speaking of symbiotes, Carnage is in the game and so is Mysterio. Mysterio is expected since he was teased in the first game, and I even believe he takes part in one of the tie-in comics. He's an iconic Spider-Man villain who just came off being the main villain of a movie, and I'm hoping this supposed leak is true. Carnage is a bit tricky for me. I like the character, but he was just the main villain of a Spider-Man game prior to Spider-Man PS4 that we don't need to talk about, and I kinda want some variety with the villains. Carnage isn't a side villain either, so I think it'd be a bit busy having both Venom and Carnage in this game, especially with it being likely that Peter has the symbiote in the game. Carnage needs to be held off for a future game in my opinion, or maybe DLC. Also relating back to Harry as Venom and why this leak lost me for a bit, Eddie Brock is in the game and he's supposed to play a major role. Why would Eddie Brock play a major role in the game and he's not Venom? This contradicts Harry being Venom in my opinion, and what major role would Eddie Brock play in the game that doesn't make him Venom? Watch him be Carnage. Eddie Brock was teased in the previous game through one of the backpacks, and I have a full theory video on how I think Eddie Brock could become Venom in this game, which is linked below. OP responded to a comment asking about the details regarding Eddie's role in the game, which they said there's nothing important to talk about. How could Eddie play a major role in the game if there's nothing important to say about his role? Like I said, this sounds like a contradiction. The next bit of information is one that I'm hoping isn't true, just because it would be idiotic to me to lock one of the characters to specific sections. Miles is playable in sections of the game. They're unsure whether to let the players free roam as him or not. This would be the lamest thing about the upcoming game if this is true. The player would finally get a chance to play a free roaming Spider-Man game with a character not named Peter Parker, and they're unsure whether to let the player free roam as Miles. The game's story is more than likely taking place throughout the city. What would stop a player from free roaming as Miles if they have to swing to an objective? This makes no sense to me. With Brooklyn possibly being in the game, I assume this is where Miles' gameplay sections would be, but I'd also like to be able to use the character whenever, wherever. And the user does mention that this would be similar to the Bat Family system in Arkham. I don't have experience with the Arkham series, so I can't give you an idea of how similar it could be. If you know, you know. Next, the user details a new gameplay mechanic that his plug told him about. It's called a web chain apparently, which is chaining together web zips so you can reach a certain point, you immediately zip to the next point, and so on. I honestly can't figure out if this is a traverse mechanic or not. Maybe it's an upgrade to fast travel, or I'm thinking this is something similar to Web Rush in the TASM games. Either way, it's hard to tell and something that I'd have to see explained visually. Finally, the last 2 points of this post relate to the swinging and swinging mechanics. The swinging is apparently overhauled, with many more swinging animations being added and ones from the previous game being carried over. The user mentions there's 2 animators on the project dedicated solely to the web release animation. Within the last bullet point, there will also be 3 swinging types to pick from: realistic, arcade, and hybrid. Realistic is being described as something similar to Spider-Man 2's system, with arcade having a handicap to it and hybrid being a mix of the two. If this is true, then I'm on board with using the Spider-Man 2 style mechanics, since I think Spider-Man PS4 swinging did a good job, but to me nothing has beaten Spider-Man 2 swinging yet. With the technology the PS5 will hold, there's no reason why Insomniac can't improve upon their already good swinging system and give us something a bit more physics-based, and I think having 3 systems to pick from would benefit anyone playing the game. Overall, like the previous leaks, a lot of things in this post are to be expected, especially with it being teased in the first game. Personally, I believe the first leaks over these, considering I pointed out a lot of times where it seemed like the user was contradicting themselves. Some of the information sounds cool, but at the same time, it's questionable. I'd like to know what Eddie Brock's major role that's not important to expand upon is, as well as why Miles would only be considered playable in specific sections. However, I'd say the things I'm looking forward to most from these leaks, if they're true, is winter assuming we get snow, the 3 swinging systems to choose from, and the addition of Queens and Brooklyn. So let me know what you guys thought of the video and whether you believe these leaks or not. Also, from everything discussed in this video, what are you looking forward to the most from this post? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, hit that like button, follow my social medias, and I will see you guys again in my next video.